This, of course, has got to do with the G7 summit that is presently underway in Germany. This is the 48th G7 summit. And on Sunday, the leaders of the 7 richest nations of the world, along with the EU representatives, held a roundtable discussion. And like what is happening at most high-stakes summits, it was Russia's war on Ukraine that dominated the talks. Now, there is a concerted attempt to try and cut off Moscow's financial lifeline. Ahead of the meeting, the world powers agreed to ban the import of gold from Russia. This was being done in an effort to try and curtail the avenues through which Russia earns money. The Western powers gathered at the Elmau Castle at the Bavarian Alps before they continue on to Madrid for talks with NATO partners. The G7 will seek to close ranks in their backing for Ukraine amidst the war, while grappling with intensifying global fallout of the war, from soaring inflation to a looming food crisis and energy shortage. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, now in its 5th month, has been mired in a series of crises. Now, the American President Joe Biden, who's on a 5-day trip of Europe, held a bilateral meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The two leaders have vowed to stay united against a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
We have to stay together, because Putin has been counting on from the beginning. And somehow NATO would and the G7 would splinter, but we haven't, and we're not going to. So we can't let this aggression take the form it has and get away with it.
All right, so that was the conversation between the two leaders there. American President telling Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, they have to stay together. And this was also another meeting between the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the French President Emmanuel Macron, who held a bilateral ahead of the summit. Both leaders said that they see an opportunity to turn the tide in the war in Ukraine. Johnson also warned against trying to settle the conflict, although how the war in Ukraine can be turned around is something that these leaders have not spoken about. Other leaders, including the Italian President Mario Draghi, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and the European Union Chief Ursula von der Leyen, also arrived at Munich. The leaders will, of course, be confronted with the looming threat of a recession, as pressures over climate change will also be a topic of discussion at the G7. And also an interesting and a special guest at the G7 summit is India, and the Indian Prime Minister is in Munich for the crucial summit. This is the Indian Prime Minister's 2nd trip to Germany in as many months. In the month of May, he visited Germany for the 6th edition of the India-Germany Intergovernmental Consultations. He is also expected to hold bilateral meetings with other G7 leaders. Now remember, G7, or the grouping of 7, refers to the 7 richest nations in the world. India is not a part of the G7 nations. But India has now become a regular participant at these meetings because the West needs the support of India to confront many of the global challenges. So this year too, Germany, which is of course hosting this event, invited India. Now, Washington has said that New Delhi's presence at the table is crucial. New Delhi's participation at G7 comes despite a differing stance on how to respond to Russia's war in Ukraine. While the United States and many countries of Europe have chosen to go the sanctions way, New Delhi has taken a principled approach of diplomacy and dialogue as the way forward to solve the ongoing conflict. So the question, of course, is, will New Delhi's cameo in Germany affect its relationship with Moscow? The G7 leaders say that the aim is not to splinter the two allies, that is India and Russia, but there is a concerted effort to try and draw New Delhi into the Western camp. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.